This video is powered by the pros at Pascal Air Plumbing and Electric. Arkansas owned, Arkansas operated. GoPascal.com.
Bob Holt, not in person, but on the telephone. And we've got Bob right now here on Halftime from the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette. Appreciate your time, Bob. How are you today?
Hey, I'm good. How you guys doing?
Doing okay.
Doing well.
All right. Sun is shining brightly. It's a gorgeous day. Got a look at the International Space Station last night. That's something I'll touch on later on. But we don't know who's going to be behind center for Arkansas on Saturday. And I feel like we're all now immediately skeptical of the reasons that a player is allowed back after a concussion. And maybe a lot of us were already skeptical about it before the situation last week with Tua Tagovailoa. How do you feel about the situation with KJ and not will he or won't he play? And do you think that any extra caution is taken by the Arkansas coaching staff because of what happened with Miami quarterback Tua Tagovailoa?
I'm sure what happened with Tua should probably raise everybody's awareness, whether it's, media, fans, coaches, players, doctors, trainers, all that. I mean, I'm no expert. I'm not aware of any time that I felt Arkansas put a guy out there who shouldn't be out there. And I will say, I'm not exactly sure when everything started changing, probably in the last 20 years. But, we all know probably in, 50s, 60s, 70s, and the 80s, guys in the NFL or in college were probably playing when they shouldn't be. I mean, it was, how many fingers am I holding up? Get back out there. And I don't think that was done out of a lack of concern for players, just the way everybody was, whether it was the players, the coaches, the trainers. I think there was just a lack of awareness. I mean, I remember, I didn't play football, but I remember reading an instant replay, Jerry Kramer's great diary of the 67 Packers championship team. People used to withhold water at practice kind of like as a punishment or as an incentive, and then you think about it now and you think that not only was that dangerous, it was basically insane. I mean, everybody needs to be properly hydrated, right? But back then it was sort of like, well, don't give them the water, it'll toughen them up or something. I don't exactly know what the attitude was back then, but hopefully we've all come a long way in terms of player safety. And I'm pretty sure that Arkansas would not put KJ Jefferson or anybody else if they're in harm's way if they weren't totally convinced he was ready. But I do think the Tua thing probably just adds another degree of awareness for everybody, and it should. But I mean, KJ Jefferson will not be playing unless he's been, 100% cleared. I'm convinced of that.
I think the way you describe about how concussions were treated previously, it's pretty much before 2010, 2011, might have been because, nothing would show up on an X-ray, right? I mean, it's different than putting an arm or a knee or an ankle under an X-ray machine. You can see something's broken. You can see something's poking through the skin. You can see blood. You can see a bruise. You couldn't see the bruise on someone's brain, and X-rays, didn't necessarily show you that. So it's like, well, all right, when someone's answering my questions and they're talking to me, I guess they're all right. That's the way I see it. And obviously things are much different now, and you're able to, there's a protocol that goes into it and certain things that have to happen before somebody's welcomed back onto the field or even allowed back onto a field. And, it has to be that you couldn't necessarily, see the injury in ways that you can see other injuries.
Well, I know one thing. I know, and I've never had a concussion that I'm aware of. At least I didn't play football, didn't, I don't know, fall 2 stories or something from a window. But I think, they have really severe headaches. Well, they feel physically ill. They have to be in a dark room, and light bothers them and things like that. It doesn't think that's the case with KJ, or else he wouldn't have been at practice, Monday and Tuesday, and then he wouldn't have done whatever he did yesterday, which I assume was probably something pretty light. But it's like Sam said on Monday, and he didn't confirm he was in concussion protocol, but I think we can all connect the dots. Sam talked about, that I've had guys who have, been out for 3 or 4 days. I've had guys that have been out for 27 days. Probably my guess is the normal time span will probably be a week to 10 days. And obviously the Mississippi State game falls on the early part of that. but none of us, unless we're on the inside, none of us know exactly the extent to the the injury he sustained. But yeah, you're right. It's not like an ankle or a knee. Before in the summer or whenever, maybe they do it in the spring. I don't know, but they all do these baseline tests where they get asked a lot of questions and probably have to come up with a lot of different things. And somebody, presumably a lot smarter than us, came up with these. Like, you'd have trouble remembering what your, first girlfriend's name was. You'd have trouble remembering what your Social Security number is, or whatever, if you had a concussion, or maybe you would, And but I think that, and obviously they're looking at people's pupils and eyes, and I'm sure they do some CAT scans and things like that. And maybe some of it's just kind of talking to a guy and kind of seeing, how is it? If you know the guy really well, is he off a little bit? But, but I'm not going to pretend that I know exactly what's going on because I don't.
I'm all of a sudden reminded of this. We haven't brought it up yet this week. Maybe I'm a bit surprised I hadn't thought of this before. It's a pretty interesting coincidence how we are talking about this right now, and yet wasn't the way that Mike Leach treated a concussed player, Craig James' son at Texas Tech, one of the reasons that the whole thing went down in Lubbock with him? I mean, it was I remember reading a story about it. Yeah, he threw him in a dark room in a shed and just let him sit there. I know you're supposed to be in a dark room and everything, but I was reminded about, you remember that story, Bob, right?
Oh, yeah. Now that you bring it up, and that I don't know exactly everything that led to Mike Leach's departure, but, he had a good record at Texas Tech. I think he won 84 games in 10 years. So, he averaged over 8 wins a year, went to a bowl game every year. One year they were ranked, like in the top 3 or 4. So he did a really good job there. But, yeah, I don't know if it's because it was Craig James' son, and Craig James at the time, obviously he was an NFL player and star player at SMU, helped get him put on probation, I guess, and played in the NFL with New England and Washington, I believe it was. And so maybe he exerted undue power, over what happened with Leach. And, of course, Leach sued Texas Tech because he felt like they owed him money. And but I don't think that thing's ever gotten resolved, probably at least not the way he wanted to. But, yeah, he had I don't know, I should talk to Mike Leach about this, but I think he felt like, this is Craig James' son. I'm supposed to give him preferential treatment while I'll just have him sit in the shed and, in the dark or whatever. So I think, Leach probably didn't like, Craig James, just the way he maybe interfered with his program as a big shot parent. That sort of seems like a thought, from the outside looking in. But yeah, that is kind of ironic that you bring it up.
Yeah, Bob, when it comes to Mike Leach, there's never shortage of entertainment, whether it's controversy like that, whether it's the quotes that he gives. And when it comes to facing against a Mike Leach offense, known as the air raid, that really isn't, kind of an air raid. It's not like they're throwing the ball 50 yards down the field every single time. It's a lot of short dump passes, a lot of screen plays, a lot of different things in the passing game other than just, go routes like an air raid would describe. But when playing this week against Mike Leach, and the secondary has clearly been the weak spot on the defensive side, how do you have to attack this Mike Leach thing? I mean, do you try to just keep everything in front of you and see if you can survive a death by 1,000 cuts? Or do you, try to make them beat you by going 50, by making Will Rogers have to throw a bunch of go routes down the field?
Well, yeah, you're right. I mean, their passing game is really kind of an extension of their running game. They run the ball fairly well. They're averaging, I think, just under 100 yards rushing, which is pretty good for them because they don't run the ball that much. I think they're averaging about 4 yards a carry, and that includes the sacks. Yeah, it's Arkansas, we know a strength of their team this year has been getting sacks with Drew Sanders and Jordan Dominic and Zach Williams. They have several guys with multiple sacks. But, Will Rogers is a master of getting the ball off in a hurry. He's got a quick release, a lot of shorter routes. He's not like he's having to wait for some guy to break open 25 yards downfield or wait for some big play developing. They're flooding the field with guys, some deep, some intermediate, some short. So he's going to be a tough guy to sack. And, the last year, of course, in 2020, when they beat Mississippi State down there. That was K.J. Costello, who's a transfer from Stanford. He had an incredible game the week before against LSU, just threw for 1 million yards. And then he really struggled against Arkansas, which had to drop 8 for most of the game, if not all of it. And last year they did a lot of dropping too. But like Sam pointed out, with the 3 linemen and dropping 8, they got bulldozed by some teams, pretty good, Georgia in particular. And so, they brought in more guys who could rush the passer, like Sanders and Dominique, and they've done more blitzing. They've played more man, which has exposed the DB. So I think what you're probably going to see Saturday, obviously, again, I don't know, but you're probably going to see a mixture of dropping 8 and coming after Rodgers, because you can't just let him stay comfortable the whole game. The whole key is disguise and stuff, so he doesn't know what's coming. Are they bringing 8? I mean, are they dropping 8, or are they bringing 5 or 6? From a blitz standpoint. So I think they're going to have to mix it up and just hope they can get knock Rodgers off some, but off his spot some. But he's a really good quarterback. He's thrown 19 touchdowns, completing 30% of his passes. So he can throw deep and he can throw short. You're going to see a lot of short passes. But they also got a guy like Ra Thomas, kind of a crazy first name there, Ra. Sorry, all right. But they've hit some deep passes too. So Rodgers is just a really good quarterback, and he started since the middle of his freshman year in 2020, and he's very experienced, very good, very, very smart. He had a good game last year against them.
Mm-hmm. Now, on the offensive side of the ball, if KJ is unable to go, that means you're going to be relying a lot on those running backs, and with the running game getting probably an extra, probably an extra 10 to 15 carries throughout the game than what they're normally already averaging as pretty high. Do you see Rocket taking on those, or do we see it more evenly distributed between A.J. Green, DeBinion, and Dominique Johnson, where instead of, A.J. and Dominic, I think last week had 5 and 4 carries, they're up closer to 10, and Rocket stays at around his 20 to 24 carries?
Yeah, I think you probably see that divided more evenly among the running backs. And Dominic Johnson had a big game against Mississippi State, back for a while now. A.J. Green, and guy's got a good burst. He's played pretty well. DeBinion's a guy that Sam Pittman's talked about how they want to get more involved. And they had the unfortunate fumble last week, but I know fans don't like it. That's going to happen sometimes, especially with a young player. I think the worst thing you can do after a guy fumbles like that with a young player is just not give him the ball, because then that's really going to kill his confidence. I think you got to get him back on the horse and get him involved again. But obviously, Arkansas's got a veteran offensive line. They've got some really good running backs. So, if KJ Jefferson can't play, or even if he does, they're going to have to lean heavily on that running game. And I also wonder, and this is just my guess, the Arkansas likes to play pretty fast tempo, but if KJ Jefferson isn't in there, you maybe shorten the game some, don't play quite as much with tempo. You keep your defense off the field a little bit more. I think that'll be interesting to see what happens. Are they running tempo as fast as they do, or do they feel like we need to shorten the game, protect our defense a little bit?
Bob, I know you've been traveling to the road games, so you'll be there Saturday, Starkville, Cowbellville, and everything. I don't hear the cowbells in basketball games. They don't allow them in. I don't really hear them very much in the baseball games at Dudy Noble Field. But I've watched some videos, and, man, do they get that thing going during football. You wear earplugs when you go to Starkville?
I have. One time a few years ago, we were driving in there and we stopped at like a Dollar General store or something and literally got some earplugs. And I think they help some. It's kind of weird because, if there's a colleague who wants to point out something or ask you something, or you want to hear a PA announcement like so-and-so just had his longest run of the year or whatever, then, the earplugs can be, can kind of hurt what you're trying to get accomplished. But, the feeling there, when you leave, the old cowbells will ring in your ear for a couple of days. I will say this, Sam mentioned this, in 2020, obviously nobody, except maybe A&M, everybody had reduced capacity. Yeah. And so the cowbells weren't as bad. I wasn't at that game. I didn't travel to that game. So, but they do adhere to the SC policy of they don't ring them when the other team's getting ready to snap the ball and the quarterback's calling the signals, because they basically banned the cowbells for a while. And then that's such a big part of Mississippi State's tradition. They went to the SEC and said, well, if we stay within these guidelines, can people bring them in? Because people were still bringing them in. It was kind of like liquor. People were sneaking them in, but it was nothing like everybody had one. Well, so the SEC agreed with a caveat that you can't ring them when the other team is snapping the ball and the quarterback's trying to call out the signals. And so but they, in my experience there, they've adhered to that. And Sam mentioned Monday, he talked to some other coaches, and that they said, yeah, they when they're supposed to stop ringing them, they do, because it'd be a penalty on Mississippi State if they didn't, and then eventually the SEC would probably say, no, I can't bring them in anymore. But they have all kinds of things on the scoreboard, like ring responsibly. It's almost like a DWI campaign or something. But do it the right way, because otherwise it's not a right. It's a privilege the SEC has granted them because of their tradition. And if they don't adhere to the guidelines, then they're going to take that away from them.
Bob, appreciate you, man. We always enjoy these conversations. Thank you, and safe travels to Starkville, okay?
Back, and BetOnline remains your number one source for all your football betting needs this season. You'll find the latest odds, matchup info, player news, and game trends. And as your continued source for all sports wagering info, BetOnline features live betting, free contests, live scores, and giveaways all season long. Always the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports and events like MLB, MMA, tennis, boxing, and even golf. Head to betonline.ag to join and receive your 100% welcome bonus with your first deposit. Make sure to use the promo code BELIEVE to receive your rewards. That's BLEAV. Bet online, where the game starts.